Plan Commission for the Village of Mount Pleasant for October 18th, 2023 to order. Before we go any further, though, I'd like to have a few moments of silence for Terry Meyer. She's Joe Meyer's wife who passed away. A very good friend and supporter of the village. So a few moments of silence, please. Okay, we'll continue on then with roll call, please.
Shriver?
Here.
Riesler?
Here.
Van Beckham?
Here.
Ozanovsky?
Here.
Everyone else is excused today,
All right.
but we have a quorum.
There we go. Then we'll move to the meeting minutes for September 20th, 2023.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next will be Ordinance 2023, amending the Code of Ordinances, Appeals Divisions, Conditional Uses, Appeals of Administrative Decision. Robin.
Hello. So we've been very busy on code updates, and I probably not going to be quite the last of them. There's some other ones that are not actually in the zoning code that are related to this, but they will have to go through CAL and Village Board instead. So anything that's not in Chapter 90 has to go through that route as opposed to this one. So. But yeah, so this is basically refining some of the changes with state law, as well as clarifying our use laws about appeals and procedures. So for this batch of codes, it's a little bit due to Act 16 from the legislature mixed with quality assurance provisions. It clarifies that appeals relating to final approvals of conditional uses go to circuit court, that appeals of administrative site plan approvals go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and not the Plan Commission, and it specifies a time frame on an appeal hearing for an administrative appeal and makes clarifications on applicability and which official is responsible for receiving and transmitting the appeal. So I'm going to go through the changes sort of one by one. So the first one is on conditional uses. And adds the review by court of record. This changes to specify the appeal process for conditional uses. There actually wasn't a process identified in the current code, which would be an error. Every other process has that present at the end. 2017's Wisconsin Act 67 and 2023's Wisconsin Act 16 both changed appeal procedures regarding conditional uses. Generally, state law now allows an appeal of a denial of a conditional use to go directly to the circuit court, and it allows municipalities to allow that any appeal of a conditional use permit must take that path by ordinance. So it basically just says conditional use permit, if you're appealing, you just go to circuit court. This change prevents municipalities from making decisions on conditional uses outside the boundaries of state law by giving applicants a clearer path to appeal. Previously, it was unknown whether such an appeal would go to the Board of Zoning Appeals before circuit court. So that basically kind of clarifies that. The one exception is that if it is an administrative appeal, so basically if the appeal is relating to some sort of determination that somebody made an error, that something was too close, or just an error was made, that can still go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, who would have the power of that official to correct or rectify that error. But we'll get to that in a second. The appeals of administrative decisions changed multiple small clarifications. First change clarifies that both an administrative official and administrative body are subject to this provision. The language says administrative official, and that's actually been debated about in Supreme Court kind of stuff. But everybody knows that a plan commission ruling on a site plan is appealable to the Board of Zoning Appeals. You're an administrative body, not an administrative official. Like, you're administrative officials. So, I mean, its logic just kind of games out, but it's just to be clear, just to not really, clarity is better. So the other ones are basically clarifying who can file, who the person appealing files with, and who transmits that to the proper board. Ours was inconsistent. One just said community development director, even though appeals can be made of multiple different zoning or positions, such as the plan commission or the zoning administrator or something like that. And the other in state law says the appeal must be registered with from whom the appeal is taken. So just kind of covering our bases and saying either community development director or the official from whom the appeal is taken on both of those instances. The fourth change is adding a number of days to which the village must hear the appeal. The hearing was mandatory. It said that a hearing must be held. So with a mandatory provision, it's usually good to give a time frame on that, so you don't want something withering on the vine forever. So we established it at 45 days. That is the same time frame we give anybody who says, I want to submit an application, how long is it going to take? So that basically gives a couple weeks out from submittal deadline. So today would be the submittal deadline for a Board of Zoning Appeals hearing for next month. So to give it two more weeks, then that is the general time frame. So it must be held within that time. I think the only time that would be even like remotely up for grabs is basically a holiday cancellation of one of the board meetings. If it falls on one of those days, like a Christmas or something like that, I think there's probably, some allowances for that being okay. Lastly, in site plan review, this change moves appeals of administrative site plan reviews to the Board of Zoning Appeals instead of the Plan Commission. The Community Development Director, and these are under 5,000 square feet or otherwise by right approvals. The Community Development Director approves administrative site plan reviews with delegated authority that was from the Plan Commission that has the same weight as the Plan Commission. An appeal to the Plan Commission kind of undermines that delegated authority. It basically says that it's less than or something like that. So this change also prevents a double appeal scenario where somebody would appeal something to the Plan Commission and then appeal that to the Board of Zoning Appeals. It's just silly. So we would just move it. The overall goal is to move appeal processes to a board specifically appointed with the job and the procedures to handle those processes. So that is the long of it, because I probably talked too long. Any questions? Yeah, this is the simple one. So yeah, that's pretty cut and dry. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion on this? If not,
We have to go to open. Nobody's here, but
pardon me?
we don't have to open it to the public?
I usually do, and I was going to.
Oh, I'm
after-
sorry.
After
No,
any other
I-
questions?
nothing
No
for
other
me.
questions? Any public comment on this? Okay, hearing none, then I would look for the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make that we move to recommend approval of ordinance 22-2023.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Then I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next will be ordinance 21-2023, 2245 Mead Street zoning map amendment, ZMA 23-8.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, grant from Habitat applied to amend the zoning map from B1 neighborhood business to RL2, which is low density residential. The applicant wishes to demolish the existing commercial building and build a residential building in its place, as Habitat does. This application complies with the land use elements of the multi-jurisdictional comprehensive plan. We don't have a adopted plan for local planning area 20. Neither the master bicycle plan nor the park and open space plan contain any recommendations for the subject property. With that, we will review the rezoned property at the staff level for any applications for 1 and 2 family structures, but there's no other real allowed uses that they could have under the applicable zoning district. And with that, we recommend approval. Pretty simple. Sorry. I did want to point out, I put in the fiscal analysis sheet here, and just pointing out that this type of urban form, I thought this was a good place to take a step back and look at like a denser neighborhood like this, which is often seen, I think, in the village's eyes to be like a lower income area of the village, which might be true in general for like the census data on the population. However, from a production standpoint and the amount of taxes it generates, with a similar house to what Habitat has put just up the street, so kind of a total estimated taxable value of about $140,000. That nets out to essentially $1.3 million an acre of taxable value, which is above our general target of $1 million an acre, and significantly above some like 90s wider lot suburban subdivisions. So there is a good argument for this level of density, not just from an area of, this is an area that could see increased investment. Habitat's doing a lot of great work in the neighborhood, but that investment leads to an economically sustainable use of land that pays pretty high percentage of taxes for having pretty low value relatively to other homes in the area. So just an interesting note. Keep in mind when we come to you and talk about density, that's one of the trade-offs is you can have much lower value individual units and still get pretty high net taxable values per acre. But in regards to the individual zoning map amendment, we don't have other conditions and we recommend approval. We're here with Grant from Habitat if you have any questions. Other than that, I can answer any technical ones.
Any questions for staff?
No.
Any questions for the applicant, Grant? No? If there's no questions, then I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve ordinance 21-2023, 2245 Mead Street zoning map amendment, CMA-23-8.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any public discussion? Grant, anything you'd want to say, or? If you could come up and just give your name and address, please. Make it worth your while to come here instead of just turning around and leaving.
I'll be brief. I just wanted to say thank you for your consideration. We appreciate your support as we look to provide more affordable housing in the village of Mount Pleasant. Thank you very much.
No, we appreciate what you're doing in the village. That's great. So if there's no further questions, issues, we have a motion and a second. I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Grant.
This, as well as all the items on the agenda actually today require a public hearing. That'll be next Monday at 6 p.m., which the village board meeting will have both the public hearing and their consideration of all 3 items. So, moving on to Ordinance 2023. This zoning text amendment consolidates and reorganizes the 8 business and industrial zoning districts into 5 commercial zoning districts. The village staff identified this change within the village strategic plan, which we presented to you all earlier this year and have talked to you about in years past, acknowledging the ever-changing nature of commercial real estate. Increasingly, the lines between retail, office, service, and industrial properties have blurred. For example, O&H Bakery's location on Washington Avenue, which is currently Zone B3, contains a mixture of limited industrial, which food manufacturing falls under, office and retail sales uses. The existing B3 district does not allow limited industrial uses, leaving the use as legal non-conforming, although no one's complained about ONH's existence there. I just thought it was important to note that technically, we probably looked the other way when we zoned it into B3 regarding their industrial aspect of that bakery and just classified it under bakery. Whereas, the industrial size, the front retail portion of that building has grown slightly, and the office area of the building has grown slightly, but the industrial portion of the back building, they've come in for multiple amendments to that site plan to expand the industrial use in the back for their, shipping operations around the country and the world, which no one's complained about, but is technically a limited industrial use per our zoning ordinance. Conversely, many large retail sales users, such as Walmart, Menards, Petco, et cetera, operate out of buildings largely indistinguishable from industrial buildings, other than kind of their facades. The way they're built is kind of like a light industrial building, more or less. I think something like a Costco is kind of the best example of this, where you go to a Sam's Club or a Costco or something, you're basically shopping in a warehouse because you're buying stuff off pallets, more or less. So to address these issues and to kind of stay ahead of the curve, the 5 updated commercial zoning districts focus more on use intensity and less on the strict separation of commercial uses. Those categories are C1, low intensity commercial, which would accommodate low-intensity commercial, low-intensity manufacturing, and residential uses. The village intends the C1 district to support those very local uses within neighborhoods. So this is something that you'd feel comfortable walking down to the corner to get like a coffee at a local coffee shop or something. C2 would be moderate intensity commercial, accommodating moderate intensity commercial, low intensity manufacturing, and upper story residential uses. The village intends the C2 district to support these local uses within small nodes or along local corridors. So this might be something that you would walk to, but you might also bike to. Think like the flower shop on the corner of Spring Street and what is that, Emerson, Newman? So those types of uses where they kind of lie on the edges of neighborhoods and might be located along like local corridors, but they're not going to locate in a big commercial area. When we say low intensity manufacturing, we're defining that as the artisan manufacturing under the use definitions. So when you look at the use table, that's artisan manufacturing. Those are things like a shoemaker or a bike shop that does some like mechanical fixing or assembly of bikes, things like that, where a cabinet shop where, you would, in a classic neighborhood like the one Habitat is building in, you would see it as an apartment above, but in other areas you might see it as like a unit behind or adjacent on the similar property, those types of things. C3 would be high intensity commercial. That district accommodates high-intensity commercial, moderate-intensity manufacturing, and upper-story residential uses. The village intends the C3 district to support those regional uses concentrated within large nodes or along regional commercial corridors. So think the big commercial areas in the village along 11, along 20, at the corner of 11 and 31, across from the mall. Those types of areas, as well as some of the areas out near the interstate, by like the 20 interchange, where you have kind of this mix of hotel, some office, some light industrial uses. The St. John's property out at, Globe Drive and 20 got us thinking a lot about this type of use because they have essentially like lower scale office uses in the front, but like light industrial buildings in the back. Previously, those were split zoned. It was like business in the front and business park in the back. Now those would lie under the same district and really will be a little bit more use agnostic, so people will just be able to choose the building type that works better for their business. But we have seen some like cross interest in those that we didn't originally anticipate for the business park type use. So things like gyms or retail users or places that value maybe a 24-foot clear height inside their building as opposed to a 15-foot clear height or something inside their building. Moderate intensity manufacturing would go up to that limited industrial standard, so it would allow for food manufacturing, it would allow for breweries, those types of things where like that commercial industrial mix is starting to get a little bit more blurred, where you might have some industry in the back and some retail or customer serving focuses in the front. The C3 district is really intended to be kind of the most intense commercially focused district while still allowing those industrial and residential uses to come in that are mostly, okay, all living in the same district together. The C4 district is general industrial. That accommodates high-intensity commercial and high-intensity manufacturing uses. It does not allow residential uses. The village intends the C4 district to support those regional uses within business parks. So this is really mashing together our business park district and our M2 district, which used to be separate before we rewrote the zoning code, because the business park district was really intended to serve kind of a 90s style business park, and the M2 industrial was intended to serve like the historic industrial base of the village, like kind of your old-timey factories. That those industrial uses have kind of agglomerated together. We don't get a lot of really heavy industry use, and the heavy industry use that we get is still more than not located inside buildings due to air permitting and other environmental regulations, is much less impactful on adjacent properties. So we felt okay merging those together, but taking out the residential allowance, so residential uses couldn't come in there. And then finally, the C5 district is special industrial. That accommodates high-intensity manufacturing uses, which are intended to be fully separated from commercial and residential uses. This is our former M3 district, which we decided was valuable enough to keep fully separate. We renamed it to correspond with the updated naming, but it largely stays the same. So things like chemical manufacturing, slaughterhouses, asphalt plants, stuff that's predominantly outdoors, mining and quarrying, that type of thing, where if you go to residential use, the interior buffers would be pretty heavy against that adjacent residential use, and from a master planning perspective, we likely would try not to locate those uses adjacent to residential areas.
Can I add one thing? We also just thought it was important to establish that there be, because a rezone is pretty much the only one of the only discretionary, it's a legislative act and it's discretionary, and we wanted to keep that power open for any of these uses if they needed to pop up. So having it as a separate zone allowed for that.
Yes, good point. The one of the reasons why we felt comfortable moving some of these together is due in large part to us road testing the existing village-wide standards that we adopted in the new zoning code. So lighting standards, noise standards, landscaping and screening standards, walls, etc., are much more clear-cut on how to apply those in the new zoning code. And so uses like higher intensity commercial now have to play by a more universal set of rules that are less subjective. So those, I think, have worked out really well in the site plan reviews that we've done over the last few years since we adopted the updated zoning code, which makes us feel a little bit more comfortable in allowing more use flexibility, because we know the things that people are going to complain about, like really bright lights, we're already regulating on the front end. The updated Table 90-310-2 revises lot area per dwelling unit, lot width, and building coverage ratios to more closely match with corresponding residential-only districts. It sets new standards for street-facing ground and upper story transparency. This is something that we actually brought over from the MX district, which means some of the feedback we've gotten on our newer industrial buildings, particularly like the ones out closer to the interstate, is people would like to see a higher level of architecture for some of those buildings. So one of the ways that we thought we could primarily address that would be through requiring at least 20% of the ground story is glazed windows, and then up to 10% for upper stories. So that should pretty significantly boost the amount of glazing you'd see, and also emphasize kind of the pedestrian level around that first floor for people, so those buildings interact with the public a little bit more. It also sets new height limitations by story rather than feet, including new minimum height requirements for the C3 and C4 district. So that's minimum height requirements. So in those intense commercial and industrial districts, you couldn't have a primary building that's a single story. It would have to be at least 2 stories or up to 24 feet. So that should also help when these larger users that have greater setbacks from the right-of-way should help them feel in scale with potentially some smaller outlot buildings or things like that in front of them. The accompanying use table changes allow residential uses into C1 through C3. Some of those districts are upper story only. And the C4 district reallows many of the commercial uses previously allowed in the pre-2020 business park district due to us re-merging M2 and BP together. These updates do not conflict with any element of a multi-jurisdictional comprehensive plan for Racine County 2035. However, our strategic plan under Gross does identify the need for modern, continuously updated zoning ordinances when guiding future development applications. With that, we recommend approval of the attached ordinance, and I'm sure you have many questions, so let's get into it. This is a big package. I know we've kind of talked about this a lot over time and through different other applications and things like this, but it's kind of the culmination of a lot of discussions internally at the staff level to come up with something that's setting greater standards for buildings, but pairing that with more use flexibility across districts.
Okay. I have a quick question on the glazing.
Mm-hmm.
Do those have to be clear windows, or could they be full windows?
They do have to be full windows. I specifically, and we'll talk about that in the next ordinance section, specifically call out that spandrel windows or opaque windows that are glass but not see-through do not count. The idea is, a lot of industrial users are hesitant for those, so we know this is kind of us taking a big step on architectural standards for them. But I've never bought the argument that people don't want to see into those industrial buildings. I mean, a slaughterhouse, sure, people don't want to see that. But like a warehouse, honestly, most of the people I talk to find some of that interesting, and they actually feel a greater sense of connection to the use when they understand what's going on, not just the sign on the building, but they can see, oh, that's what's going on inside. I think a really good example of this is Uline. I know those warehouses are essentially custom for Uline when you head south into Kenosha County, but they have like full glazed, essentially openings along their buildings that you can see fully into their warehouse. They're obviously a 24-hour operation, so they're lit up at night as well. And I don't think anyone driving down the interstate is like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to look at that warehouse. They think, oh, that's interesting. There's stuff going on there. So that's kind of the idea, as well as, employees like natural light. And historically, we used to light warehouses. I mean, you look at old warehouses like 1800s, early 1900s, they always had the upper windows when electric lights weren't as prevalent. So just trying to mirror those together. We chose the 20% and 10% ratios after doing some testing on our existing buildings, thinking those are probably, it's taking a step forward in requiring more glazing, but it's not going to like blow out a budget by requiring like 50% of the ground stories transparent. So that might be an area where we fine tune it over time depending on feedback, but we think it's probably in the right ballpark.
And signage in those windows is not allowed?
It is in a limited perspective, but they cannot like fully just cover them in, like we manufacture InSinkerator products here or whatever, not to pick on them. That was just the first thing that came to my mind. But yeah, they can't cover it and just hide it. And if they did, we would go after them.
Cool. Tom?
The first question I have is along the lines of intensity.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the key terms used in here, and it's the dividing line between every one of your classifications, but I didn't see anywhere in this ordinance that it defines intensity, provides any standards for what's low versus high intensity, doesn't say who's going to determine what's intensity. It's just there. So how does intensity going to work here? Do you think it needs more refinement in the ordinance?
It specifically, I wanted it to be more of an aspirational definition that is considered when you are looking at zoning map amendments. So I think it follows through in the use table to show which allowed uses are allowed in which districts. However, I'm hesitant to set actual intensity limits like unit per acre or number of employees per acre because those, particularly on the employment side or traffic generation side, tend to change so frequently over time that they're hard to keep track of. I want it to be more like the feel for the area, and it's more valuable towards like a master planning discussion when you all are looking at like neighborhood plans, like the local area plan 5 that we're talking about, or the village-wide comprehensive plan. We can have conversations about what should this area feel like, and then we have zoning districts that kind of correspond generally to those levels of intensity. So I
understand what you're saying, but so much of what your staff has done is to give applicants a pretty clear idea in advance what they can do and not do. And here's the first time I've sort of heard Sam on a touchy-feely, you'll know it when I see it basis. And
he is hidden in there.
I can probably clarify a little bit. Some of it is actually in the physical form standards, so and allowances. So like RL, the residential low intensity. So that only allows 1 and 2 family buildings, and it has a height limit of 35. Okay. So that basically really defines the intensity of the use right there from the jump.
But that's an easy one.
Yeah, it's an easy one, and we kind of go from there. And there's a similar lot size restriction on C1. So C1 is a small lot size district that also is could be like the Mead Street application. That was a B1. So, and that's switching over, but that's kind of what we're aiming at. But also, for example, we have quite a number of houses on Washington Avenue and Durand that have converted over to businesses. So that was basically that's the level of intensity. Basically, you could blend it into a neighborhood or a home, but there's a business there. And then, so as the districts go up, you can see the building form requirements change. And like, for example, a C3, that's the only one that allows a really large lot. So it allows a 900-foot lot, which is right below what we require as a block. Like a block needs to be 1,000 feet.
Well, I accept that setting size limits for the buildings is correlated to a degree to intensity. However, you could have a very small building that's awfully obnoxious in terms of what it's doing, in terms of noise, pollution, crowds, late hours, you name it. And I don't have a great solution for you as to how you can go about to be really specific on intensity, but if you're not more specific than this, you could have somebody come in here and he's going to claim he's got a C1 project, and you're going to tell him, no, you're a C4. He's going, I'm not dense, and you're going to say, no, you're really intense.
Yeah,
Again, I don't have a great solution, but I think you might want to just think it. My suggestion is you just give it some more thought as to, do you want to tackle the definition? You think it's going to come back to bite you to not do it? If I come up with a great solution, I'll let you know. But that's my first comment. Intensity is not defined, and I don't know if it has to be.
Yeah,
The next.
I get your point.
Go ahead. I've got another.
Yeah, the use chart helps too. If you really kind of break that down.
Okay.
I had like an idea about use intensity with commercial districts from the old ones where, a C1 is like, as Sam said earlier, almost like pedestrian person oriented. 2 is like a neighborhood oriented, and 3 is like intense cars, drive-throughs, stuff like that. Those are the kind of intensity that we're talking about. And we could definitely spell that out and have even form examples. That's not out of the question.
Can there be like a broad guidelines, like C1 fits within this parameter?
I want to be hesitant about putting some of those guidelines in the zoning code because that's really the job of neighborhood plans and master planning. At some point, those discussions are at a higher level than like the detailed development ordinances. Every zoning amendment we bring into you says this complies with the comprehensive plan. Well, keeping those documents up to date and having adopted neighborhood plans as our long-term goals state are where a lot of those conversations take into place. The idea is you'd have like a lot of your public outreach during a proactive comprehensive planning or neighborhood level planning discussion. And then when zoning decisions, and you're adopting a map with those kind of general guidelines saying we think along County Trunk Highway H, we would allow moderate intensity uses. And those correspond to moderate density residential up to C2 zoning district or things like that. So I don't want to be too prescriptive in the zoning code because that's like legislative text versus like guiding documents that you all and the board have to approve.
I'm more thinking of if a new developer comes in, and how does he know where he fits in?
Oh, some of that is guidance by us, and I think we, if we do adopt this, we will do some proactive kind of public outreach to say, like, in large part, this is a zoning text change that doesn't limit existing businesses at all. Like, if you're an existing business in Mount Pleasant, really no one's use is not going to be allowed in the district that they're in now, so those transfer into the new commercial district. It's more or less getting renamed from their perspective. But we will do some outreach with our communications team over time through like the village newsletter and stuff like that to say like, hey, you might have noticed your zoning changed from B2 to C2. Here's what that means. That type of stuff.
I understand your position. I'm just wondering from the other end, how do you bridge the gap as far as?
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of kind of like boots on the ground work as we have conversations with developers over time. We do planning documents at a master planning or neighborhood planning level, communications documents from the village, but that type of thing.
Sam, I've got another comment, and this relates to, it's sort of woven all through the ordinance, is the definition and distinction between manufacturing and industrial. Sometimes your ordinance almost uses manufacturing as a catch-all inclusive of industrial, when later on industrial is defined as a broad category that includes manufacturing. So industrial is a wider range of uses than manufacturing. With that in mind, when I look at your district descriptions and just see 1 through 5, the word industrial doesn't appear once. So am I missing something?
Yeah, C5 is special industrial.
Okay,
I think there might be like a thing with special industrial would include quarrying.
but Robin,
and
when I read
junkyards.
C5, the word industrial is not there. So,
Oh.
see, what I think perhaps, and again, you might just want to go back over it, because when it says general, you see the word industrial. Okay, great. But once you get into the C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, none of them accommodate industrial. They all accommodate manufacturing. So I'm just wondering, did you mean industrial through C1 through 5, or did you mean manufacturing?
No, I mostly meant manufacturing, although in some cases it's industrial. Largely, 95% of our manufacturing uses lie within the industrial category, so artisan, limited, general, intensive. And so we were referring specifically to those types of categories in the use definition table. So
I would suggest you just reconsider through C1 through C5, replacing the word manufacturing with industrial, if that's what you mean.
we'll take a second look at it. But
And then, were you, just give me a second here. If anybody else has something, go. The next comment I was going to have is when you get into defining under Article 300 commercial uses, you talk about commercial use category that provide. When you say the commercial use subcategories are as follows, and you've got a whole laundry list, are those subcategories all-inclusive such that somebody has to fit into one
No,
of those?
that is taken directly from the zoning text as it stands now. There's no track changes call out in that definition. If you go up, I didn't include it in the ordinance amendment because it's not a category or an area that's changing. But there is a qualifier that the community development director has the authority to fit in any specific use into a corresponding category if it doesn't have a clearly obvious one. And there's a list of standards that you use, including like similar uses and trip generation and those types of things. So essentially, if it's a really specific use, I have the authority to make the call. The idea is that these are not supposed to be all-inclusive everything, because old zoning codes often called out in every zoning district, you're allowed haberdashery and a soda shop and all like old-timey stuff, and they kind of just, those uses 30 years later didn't exist.
Well, this is
So
just
it's trying to get away from that type of
But
thing.
just as a recommendation, I would just clarify in your lead into commercial uses there and your lead in to industrial uses, just clarify that your laundry list of subcategories is not all-inclusive and that there's a catch-all for whatever, as you say, just mention the catch-all, because otherwise somebody reading this, at least I wasn't sure whether it was meant to be all-inclusive.
Yeah, I'll include something in the executive summary update just to make sure. It's actually like the, as you're reading through the ordinance, it'll appear. So it would be more logical just in the pullouts that you have in the text changes, it doesn't appear. So that's understandable.
I think an important clarification could be like, manufacturing is like, assembling and making things, and industrial tends to rope in some other uses, like, quarrying isn't necessarily manufacturing. Same thing with like landfills and salvage yards. That certainly would be qualified as industrial just because it's, the space needed from other like desirable uses is probably the real clarifier there. But we definitely could, have a little bit more definition.
But
agree.
I think it's clear that under 32-32.90, it's clear that manufacturing is a category, and it's a category, subcategory in industrial, and there's more industrial than manufacturing. It's just that other places, manufacturing gets used as a more comprehensive term than I think might be intended when I think you meant
we'll
industrial.
double check
But you can
those.
run with those for what you want. Beyond that, I'm done.
I mean, this is,
I
there's,
earned my $32 reading through this
Yeah, you did.
ordinance, I'll tell you that much.
I wanted to make the point that this is the way a lot of zoning codes are moving, is to a more form-based but use-agnostic thing. I think applying that in an urban area is a lot easier, but applying it to a suburban area is a little bit more challenging when you start putting in heavy form standards. So we tried to kind of thread the needle on something that worked for the existing built environment and was aspirational, but still not the full academic exercise of a form-based code. So hopefully this sets the standard, and we'll probably be back to tinker with it in the future as we learn from our mistakes. But I think this is in large part, when we get realtors who call us and ask us what they can do with buildings, I think this code is more or less what the public expects, what they can do with it. And it's us standing in the way a little bit less, because oftentimes, we just hear about stuff or use changes or the commercial real estate market changes, and, we can continue to keep buildings occupied.
And new uses coming along we don't even know about yet.
It's a good point. A lot of people point to those industrial buildings out near the interstate, and they sometimes don't like the way they look. We adopt some form standards, but from a use perspective, those are pretty flexible buildings. I mean, you see them around southeast Wisconsin that have a variety of commercial, industrial, or mixed type uses. So, it's 30 years ago, would anyone have thought that like a brewery would operate a family-friendly restaurant out of an industrial building? Most people would probably say no. Those are all over the place now. So, things change, to your point, and this should help us not have to, I think there'll be fine tuning, but hopefully we won't have to come back to you as often to fine tune individual districts as much.
Just don't let any of these buildings paint their name like Haribo and that is disgusting.
It is between them and IKEA, there are some unknowable questions as to the permitting process that they went through. I'm sure it was some sort of special approval through a development agreement or something, because those are both obviously pretty intense uses. But I've never quite understood why some of that is necessary, but maybe that's just my own personal thing.
It's a beautiful industrial park, and then you got that across and just.
Well, if you're looking for a place to buy gummy bears, at least now you know where to find them.
Can't miss
Would have
it.
been happier if they made a picture of a gummy bear.
Well, yeah, maybe they will eventually.
All right, any further questions for Sam? If not, a motion in order?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of ordinance 23-2023 to, I think that's what it is.
Second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I will vote to pass this, but again, I just hope the staff takes another look at the verbiage and tweaks it if you think it's appropriate.
Definitely will.
Make that duly noted.
Yeah, those will be I've already kind of like spotted a couple of things that, that we'll put some notes on if anything has changed between now and village board or anything like that, just saying, okay, well, we took some advice and this is what we changed.
Sound good?
Yes.
Okay. So motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next will be ordinance 24-2023, adding codes of ordinances.
All right, last one. So this zoning text amendment adds a new division under Article 400, Village-Wide Standards, creating universal architectural standards for the RE, MX, C1, C2, C3, and C4, and P districts. The new division sets material requirements for building facades, gives the Plan Commission authority to approve alternative high-quality materials, requires matching accessory buildings, and sets standards for regarding roof pitches. The village staff drafted these architectural standards after some negative public feedback regarding recent industrial buildings, as we just were discussing. These standards, combined with the minimum glazing requirements in the proposed C district, should set clear, flexible, and objective architectural baseline for new buildings in the village. The updates do not conflict with any element of the multi-jurisdictional comp plan, and we recommend approval. Just walking you through the ordinance a little bit because it is brand new. So we set an applicability, the districts to which I just said. Building facades ordinance, which says architects may combine wall materials on each facade horizontally, with the heavier below the lighter. So essentially a taller building should appear as if the base is heavier, stone or something like that, and moving to like a cement board siding above, those types of things. Architects shall finish all exterior facades with brick masonry, wood siding, stone or cast stone, concrete, glass, not including spandrel or covered glass products which prohibit all light from entering the building. We wanted to define that to allow for some variety of window tintings and glazings. There are some pretty fancy glass products out there now, so we didn't want to stand in the way of those, but again, wanted to prohibit completely opaque spandrel glass from taking the place of it, because that has no benefit to the interior of the building as well. Architectural metal panels, cementitious siding or stucco, which does not include EIFS or other faux stucco products. The Plan Commission is authorized to approve alternative high-quality materials through the site plan review process, and detached accessory buildings that are visible and located within 200 feet of a public right-of-way must match the architectural style and major building materials of the principal building. So, any questions? I'll take a pause there. Any questions on the applicability or building facades sections of the ordinance?
I'm only thinking of one with the glass, again, being it has to be see-through. Someone like Microsoft saying it's a security issue.
I think they could come to you and argue through the use of alternative materials would be one, but really they'd be applying for a zoning variance in the sections that you just approved. And they could try to make the argument in front of the Board of Appeals. But I think that process is important because the variance carries a lot of weight and is a separate hearing, as opposed to just kind of, looking at it as a part of the greater site plan thing. Changing from one material to another, I think, is like a decision for you all, but not doing something entirely is kind of a variance from the ordinance that I think rises to that Board of Appeals level where it's worth like individual strict scrutiny on it. So we didn't want to I tried to draft these in a way that we didn't want to get into a way of telling people how to design their buildings. Mount Pleasant doesn't have a predominant architectural style or like a colloquial, individual unit type. But there are some historic types of architecture, but they vary and are largely pretty different from each other. I think like historic Scandinavian architecture in one is probably going to differ a fair amount from like prairie style architecture. So we didn't want to try to knit those together or create some new standard. We just wanted to say, here's some basic rules to follow and you'll have good materials. And then paired with those window glazing requirements, building should look good and then architects can go from there. So yeah, that is that.
I have a question as to the first provision here, combine building materials on each facade only horizontally. I just don't know what that means. If a building has a vertical element, any vertical element has to be all one. You can't have something striped. You can't have any kind of...
Essentially vertical striping, would not be allowed. And
I can just picture buildings like a facade, near the walkway, where they've got some striking vertical element for design purposes that I think look nice. I mean, they make that building look better than just a horizontal slab if you get some nice vertical elements and maybe combine. So why is this one important and why is it here?
I pulled it from a standard draft architectural ordinance that I thought was also light on like actual styling requirements, but it's probably the one I'm least married to. But I think the logic behind it is adding materials horizontally, moving vertically is a little bit more of a traditional building style. It kind of more closely mirrors what, like, if you hand built a building or an older building might look like, right? You're probably going to put stone and then like wood on the top or something like that. So I think that's the idea, is you're putting in a more traditional materials styling element than something that would be like fully vertical is probably a little bit more modern in it. So that is, out of all of these, probably the most subjective of like what flavor does the Plan Commission Village Board want. But ultimately, we thought it was that. I should also make a note that these are not applicable to the residential districts, because when you get into specific types of housing, we didn't want to increase the burden, especially outside of the RE districts, for people building houses. It's expensive enough as it is now, so not allowing tried and true things like vinyl siding aren't going to accomplish a lot if Habitat can't build a home anymore. So this is only on those commercial properties, but it really is just a styling thing.
But that's all the commercial. That's everything almost that's not residential. This will apply to.
Correct, except for like really intense industrial, that special industrial, because we thought if you're operating a quarry or a landfill, I don't think a stone building is really going to make a bit of difference on the views of it.
I might suggest maybe you add a little flexibility here, some verbiage along the lines, unless the vertical element is minimal in terms of the overall effect, and it's in keeping with the architectural
like underlying style or something
style
like
of building, and meets the refined tastes of the planning department. I mean, just something where I just think it might help you every now and then. Somebody comes in with a really great-looking building, and there's a vertical element, and then now you're kind of stuck between pretending you don't see it or telling them they need to get a variance.
I think the only thing would be if the building was actually taller than it was wide. I'm thinking of just various skyscrapers and that have, and that we're going to get a skyscraper, but anytime you get a building that's taller than it is wide, you're going to have that more of a vertical.
But I'm also thinking, again, you can get an industrial building, but around the entrances, some people really do make an effort to spruce up the entrance and add a striking architectural elements of some sort or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd hate to see, like Uline or others, that you got to say no. It looks nice, but it doesn't fit.
We can
Again, think about
we
giving
can think
yourself
about
a
it.
little bit of leeway there.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking about multi-use big buildings that would kind of divide this user from this user with bump outs and pillars and.
That's a fair point. It's also something that if the Plan Commission doesn't feel like we should regulate, we can just take out.
Well, I think we should regulate. I just don't know if it's to that specificity, if that's such a word.
Okay. We'll give it some
Horizontal.
thought. I think I understand what you're saying. We can put in a couple qualifiers in there, either A, to separate uses, or B, as like no more than a 20% of the facade or something like that to show building entrances or other like areas of like pedestrian importance. I think we can come up with something that's relatively objective. I want to get away from, stay away from something that's too us in the back, just approving things that we look good. So we'll come up with a standard there, but I think a couple quick qualifiers could work.
Good.
Okay.
The last one is building roofs. Architects shall pitch roofs if provided symmetrically sloped to no less than 512, except roofs for porches and attached sheds. That may be less than no 212. Architects shall enclose flat roofs with parapets a minimum of 36 inches high or as required by building codes. So that is just, again, a little bit more subjective, but saying like, hey, if you're going to put a roof on a commercial building, try to make it look nice, and either make it flat or pitched. Don't have it as like a moderate pitch or things like that. Ultimately, if it's below a specific pitch anyways, you end up having to do specific waterproofing stuff that you would do on a flat roof. So this is really just pushing people to go one way or another, except for sheds and porches.
And the 36 inches is meant to cover any mechanicals or anything? Or block
That's
that?
the idea. It might not fully screen them, but from a distance when you're back, it should reduce the visual impact of them. We also have the screening ordinances in the section, so if something is like super huge, it might qualify that it needs special screening under the landscaping and screening section. But in general, this is just meant to say, hey, you need something along there. If there is meant for roof access, obviously building codes will kick in, which is why I want to add that qualifier. But at a minimum, even if it's not intended for like access at all, if it's like a small flat roof element or something, at least it doesn't look like it's just a kind of tacked on thing in the back.
Okay, I was kind of thinking solar panels as well, like on
They're-
O&H.
Yeah, so those are generally well away from the sides, so I wouldn't expect that they're also typically up on racking. So structurally, maybe the bottom of the panel, if it were right next to it or something, might not get some sun depending on the angle of the sun, but in large part, I think they'd be far enough away, and 3 feet is not that much.
Okay. Any other questions for Sam?
This is again one that's pretty subjective, so we'll continue this was one where we'll likely be back in front of you over time to fine tune, because it's kind of dependent on the community and their feelings and stuff. But we just wanted to emphasize that we heard the public feedback, and this is what we're trying to do about it.
Yeah. Well, you've done a great job so far with all these. I can't imagine the work that goes into it, the reading that goes into it, the comparison that goes into it.
It's helpful to have multiple people take a look at it. As anything, if you look at it too long, your eyes start to cross. So, between Robin and everyone else here at the village, it's all a team effort.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend approval of ordinance 24-2023 to the village board.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Staff reports? None.
Oh, man, motion to adjourn.
And one more motion.
Just wanted to remind everyone before we adjourn that we're going to move next month's meeting up a week to, I think it's the 15th of November, just to stay away from Thanksgiving week, because our normal meeting date would fall, I think, on the day before Thanksgiving. So I believe it's the 5th. Give me 2 seconds here. Yeah, next month it's the 15th and not the 22nd. So we'll see you all in almost just a little less than a month.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.